Takes away a little bit of the magic, but yeah. Welcome to Behind the Pages. Joseph Finder is with us today to talk about House of Fire. Joseph is the author of 15 other works of fiction. 2 of his books have been made into movies, and he's here today to talk about his latest work, which is a thriller centered around a man who is a private investigator. He has been hired to uncover a study that proves a big pharmaceutical company basically buried a study that proved that one of their narcotic pain medications was highly addictive. He finds pretty quickly that the family who owns the big company is willing to do almost anything to protect their name and their assets. Welcome, Joseph.
Great to be here, thank you.
So tell us a little bit more about your story. Who's your main character and where do we find him as the book opens?
So the main character his name is Nick Heller, and he is a private investigator in Boston. I actually call him a private spy because he does, not only does he do investigative work that PIs do, but he also does operations, intelligence kind of work. So at the beginning of the story, Nick gets some terrible news that his old friend, Shawn, has just died from an overdose of opioids. Shawn saved Nick's life in war when Nick and Shawn were in the special forces in Afghanistan. So this is especially painful to Nick. He goes to the funeral, and at the funeral, he is approached by a woman who wants to hire him. She is the daughter of a patriarch of a very wealthy family, billionaire family, that got rich off of opioids. And she, the daughter, is kind of a rebel in the family. And she wants Nick to dig up this evidence that will prove that the company knew that their drug was dangerously addictive. And as soon as Nick hears this, he says yes. And he wants to sort of set things right with Shawn. He is angry about what happened to Shawn. And when he hears that this company buried the evidence, the clinical trial that would prove, you know, that they knew that how dangerous this drug was, he's furious. And I find that anger, that kind of desire for vengeance is a powerful engine that sort of powers the story along. So that's the basic setup for House on Fire.
Right, because just to point out that study was done before the drug was released on the market. So that prior to ever having found out, oh, people are getting addicted to it, this company knew it was going to be addictive.
That's right, they knew. And this actually, the idea for this came from some reading I had done a few years ago. We've all been hearing, you know, about the opiate epidemic and how tragic it really is. I mean, something like almost 500,000 Americans have died from opioid overdoses. It's amazing. So, but I began to read stories about how some of these companies, Insys, Johnson & Johnson, Purdue Pharma, knew how dangerously addictive these drugs are. And some of these companies suppressed that evidence. And what they were doing is they were recruiting doctors to prescribe while keeping from the doctors what they knew, how addictive these drugs were. So I read that and I just thought, this is a case for Nick Heller, my character.
Right, right. Because you've used him before in some of your other novels. He's appeared.
Right. So this is the 4th novel in which Nick Heller appears.
It is in the very first scenes of this book, we find Nick. He has been hired by 2 different men, each of them to assassinate the other. So who is Nick, for people who don't know him already? You started to say he was ex-Special Forces.
Yeah. So he is ex-Special Forces, and after that he worked as an intelligence agent for the Department of Defense. And he has gone private. So he does private work, and as the story opens, we see him hired by a restaurateur, someone who owns a seafood restaurant, chain of seafood restaurants, and wants Nick to kill his partner.
Right, right. And the partner has hired him to do the same for the other.
Exactly.
That's right. So he tells us, again early in the book, that he's often approached because people know that he was Special Forces.
Right.
That people often ask him if to basically be a hitman. How does he usually handle that?
Well, I think he usually, he turns them all away.
Yeah.
And in this case, he does more than turn it away. He sort of decides these guys are bad, and they need to be, the legal authorities need to be told what's going on. So he sort of operates as a plant to sort of get these guys arrested.
It's kind of a sting operation.
It's a sting operation,
Yeah.
exactly right. Yeah. And that's what opens. That's how we meet Nick at the beginning of the book.
That's how we kind of get to know him a little bit too. Again, for people who don't know him already, and another thing that happens, early in the story, he just mentions to us that both his father and his brother are in prison for white-collar type crimes.
Right.
Is he anything like his father or brother?
No, he is himself the rebel in the family. Nick was, which is interesting. Nick was raised in a very wealthy family. His father was this Wall Street tycoon. And then his father turned out to be a scammer. And his father is arrested, and the family becomes incredibly poor. So Nick has sort of lived as a rich man and as a poor man.
Yeah.
So he is pretty cynical about wealth. And he's cynical about corporations and how they act.
Yeah.
So I think that cynicism serves him well as a private spy.
Yeah. The only thing I thought of too, though, as I was looking at that was maybe there is a little bit of his father and brother in him too, because why didn't he then go to the State Police Special Investigative Services instead of opening his own practice, which does involve bending the law a little bit here and there? He could have been a Boston police officer.
Yeah.
So I would argue that, yes, he's been very deliberate. I mean, he's really made it his mission in life to be the opposite of his brother and father, but I think they're there a little bit.
Yeah, well, Nick is not a company man. Nick is not the sort of guy who thrives in a corporation.
Right.
I couldn't see him working for the Boston police or the FBI or anything like that. I think that he is too much of his own man. And he's too much of a contrarian. He really, he doesn't agree with what most people think. He is opinionated, and he expresses his opinion.
Yeah.
He'll turn jobs away.
Yeah.
So he's sort of a one-man show. So I sort of think that Nick, as a private eye, is in his element because he basically he controls his own destiny.
Yes, right. He doesn't have some boss saying, "Don't investigate that."
Right, and he would not be
to,
good at that.
No, he wouldn't. He wouldn't be good at taking orders.
No, exactly.
He also, when he is doing his investigations, is somebody who he's smart. I mean, you can't really get much by him, can you?
No, yeah, he is very smart, and he's always thinking a few steps ahead. And he's also got people working for him who are really good.
Yeah, yeah.
He's got Dorothy, who is his tech assistant, used to work for the NSA, and she's very good. And a number of his fellow vets work for him also, doing this kind of work, this sort of tech-related stuff. Because Nick himself is not very tech-savvy, but the people who work for him are. So there's a case, for example, in House on Fire, where Nick has to break into a company. So this is a kind of a complicated operation. He decides to enroll in a clinical study and uses that as a way to get into this company.
Yeah, into the building.
Into the building itself,
yeah.
right. And then he gets into the floor where the target office is,
Yeah.
a top executive of this company. And he uses these various toys that have been provided to him by his colleagues.
Yeah.
And I named them, and they're real. So each of these,
Really?
these are real instruments that you can use. Yeah, I call them toys, but they are real. And, and I get this from talking to my computer hacker sources. I like the idea of putting real details in.
Yes, right.
I mean, it's a made-up story.
Yes.
It's fiction, but I want to have it be set in the real world as much as possible.
Right.
And have the details be real. And
so that it could be real, really.
it could be real, yeah. And you know, the stuff about opioids in this book are it's real as well. And you know, and it's sort of, we sort of see through Nick into this very wealthy family. So the way this operation proceeds is he is hired by this woman, the daughter of the tycoon. Yeah. And his job is to infiltrate the family and find out where the secret study has been buried. And in order to do this, he's got to befriend members of the family. So he is getting to know the 5 kids in the Kimball family. 5 kids I chose because I come from a family of 5 kids. Okay. And I know the dynamics. And I didn't have to do research on that.
Yes, right. The whole hierarchy, who's the oldest.
You know, exactly.
You never grow out of that, do you?
You never grow out of it. I mean, my brother, who is only 2 years younger than me, will always be my younger brother. And you know, the youngest brother in the family was always babied. Right? And that's just the way it works in all families. So I took that and transplanted that to a very wealthy family. Yeah.
To see what would happen.
To see what would happen.
It's fun. So going back to the earlier part of the story, which sets up the rest. Nick arrives at Shawn's house and finds his Shawn's wife and children basically in shock. Yeah. If Nick could talk to Shawn at that moment, what would he tell him? What would he say to him?
I think he would tell him that that he was not weak, that he was a hero and a strong man, but he was powerless in the face of this addiction, and that there was very little he could do about it. And this haunts Shawn's son, Brendan, who is Nick's godson. And the son is sort of angry at his late father, feels that his father has failed him, was a weak man. And Nick has to tell him, no, actually, this drug is so powerful that strong people are powerless in its face.
Even people who could handle a gun, even people who were experts at defending themselves and the world basically were helpless.
And brave heroes, really, were helpless.
His son actually, in one of the conversations, does talk to Nick about about the addiction. Said that he knew his father was using again. Yeah. Do you think his son is feeling? I mean, I think it's kind of natural for this to happen. But do you think his son is feeling a bit like he should have been able to stop it?
Yeah, and I think a lot of survivors feel that way. That if only they knew, or if only they knew how bad it was, they could have stopped it. Well, as you know, it's really difficult. These drugs are so addictive, especially if you've had them for a long period of time, you've been taking them for a long period of time. And this is one of the things that really pissed me off as I was reading, was to see how doctors would prescribe these drugs to patients, but not set up an off-ramp. Not set up the way for them to get off of it. Too many doctors did that, I think. Things are changing now. In the last few years, I think doctors are much more aware of how addictive and how careful they have to be with these drugs.
Right, and that they are really can only be very short-term use.
Right, exactly. And but there are people who need them.
Yeah.
So that's, I wanted to make sure that that point came across in the book.
Yes.
Is that some people need these opioid drugs.
Yes.
But you've got to be so careful about the way you take them.
Right, and not keep upping the dose or,
Right.
over-prescribe, getting over-prescribed. Because one of Nick's friends, the person who has the RV and does a lot of the technical, work for him,
Yeah.
figures out how to make those little cards that get him into the building or
Right.
get him around the building, says, I couldn't survive without it. And he means it too. It's true. He's in chronic pain. He was very badly injured and disfigured from an IED. So it is true. These drugs have a role.
Yeah, and I wanted to make that point. I didn't want this to be all one-sided.
Right. Right.
In fact, I have the Conrad Kimball, the patriarch, gives a speech toward the end of the book in which he talks about what great work they have done. And you realize, listening to that speech or reading that speech, he believes it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
so I suppose he has to be able to sleep at night too. So
maybe that's right. Yeah. Maybe he's cynical.
Right.
But people believe it.
Yes. Right.
Yeah. So I don't know. I'm not trying to flog one particular point. I'm trying to sort of use the thriller as a way to call attention.
Yes. To a problem.
To a problem. Yeah, that's right.
And Shawn, we do know, was sort of was successful for a while in fighting his addiction.
Right.
But when he felt the pull again, how hard was it for him to get a hold of the oxydone, I think as the drug is called in this book?
Yeah, I think that he bought it from someone.
But it wasn't hard, was it?
Very easy to get.
Yeah, yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. In your research for the book, did you find that there are some areas that are easier, for people to get a hold of the medication, or the higher incidence?
There are some places around the country that where you see basically pill mills, where they're prescribing way more than anyone could possibly need.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's some kind of corruption that goes on that I think we haven't yet gotten a handle on.
Yeah. So Susan Kimball, as you said, she's the one who hires Nick, or her nickname is Suki. She approaches him just after the burial and says, comes up to him and says, "Can we talk?" What are his first impressions of her?
He sort of sees her as a sort of artsy, unserious person, and I think he's not able to take her seriously at first, until he realizes she's actually quite serious. Yeah. She is a documentary filmmaker. She's done some very powerful work.
Yeah.
And her desire to upend her family and the family's company is quite serious. And he sort of gets to know her more and more as the story goes on, and is surprised by some of the things he learns about her.
What is she planning to do with it? She tells him early in the book too. What is she planning to do with this information once she gets it?
What she claims she wants to do is she wants to basically turn this company into an anti-opiate company, basically force them to start producing drugs that will help people get off of opiates. So she really wants to take the company down. And so she's got, she's a radical, and she's really, and Nick, she's hiring Nick to do this. I think, however, Nick is not quite sure of what she really is after. Right. So that sort of, as the story goes along, that twists as well.
Yes, because in that first, within that first scene of her meeting him, she says to him, can I trust you?
Right.
Can she?
She can trust Nick.
But up to a point. He's not going to break, he might bend the law, but he's not going to break the law.
He's not going to break it, and he's not going to do anything bad.
Right.
So you're right, up to a point.
Right, right.
Right, I mean, Nick has his own moral code. And that supersedes anything else,
Yes.
including what the client wants.
Right, and including his own income. I mean, he would do
Right.
without a fee before he would break his own moral code.
That's right. And he's not a rich guy. He needs the work.
Yeah, yeah,
But he is willing to lose cases if he doesn't believe in them.
yeah. So in that earlier scene, if we asked him, does he trust her? What would he say?
I think he would say that he doesn't really trust anybody.
Yeah, that's what I thought too.
You know,
yeah.
and that he'll see as he goes along. He'll make up his mind as he gets to know her better, and he does.
Yeah. You know, she said that, you know, she tells him that she wants to force her father to set up drug clinics, you know, rehab clinics,
Right.
all that. I didn't hear her say, at least in the beginning, that she wanted to force the company to stop producing the medication. Does she want it to?
Yeah, I think she does. I mean, she wants the company to stop making oxydone and start making naloxone or any of these, some version of a drug that can help get people off of it.
Right.
Yeah.
She has unlimited money and resources.
Yeah.
So why did she choose Nick?
Well, she heard about Nick, actually. She'll reveal this later on in the book, but she heard about Nick because she met Nick's father doing a documentary about white-collar criminals. And the father reveals to her that his son is a private investigator. And when she realizes what kind of family background he comes from, the father being in prison, the brother being in prison, you know, she realizes that Nick probably has what it takes to dig up this evidence and to fight what turns out to be a conspiracy. He doesn't know we don't know who's involved in this conspiracy.
Right.
It plays out over the course of the book, but there are strong forces that are trying to keep him from finding this evidence and bringing it to light.
Right, right, because they will go to pretty much any length.
Any length, that's
to
right.
prevent it. Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah. You know, also it occurs to me too that she might see him as a person in a similar place as her. You know, having a parent who is willing to commit a crime, and she being the daughter
That's
of
a
someone
very
who's
good
not.
point.
Yeah.
That's a very good point. I think she probably recognized the similarity.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a good point. Yeah.
So Nick agrees to work.
Well, you know the book better than I do at this point. I mean, then again, I
fresh
finished
in my
writing it a year ago.
I know that is always a challenge, isn't it? Yes. So Nick does agree to work for Suki, and the first thing that happens is she takes him to her father's birthday party,
Right.
and pretends that he's her boyfriend.
Right.
Suki's brother comes up to Nick, thinking that he's her boyfriend, and says, watch out for her. And first Nick thinks she means, the brother means, be careful, take care of her. But he says, no, I mean, you be careful of her. I'm
Right.
worried about you, not her.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is that? How does Nick feel about that? Is he worried?
I don't think he's worried, but I think he's wary. I think that he is intrigued, wonders what that means, and is determined to figure her out.
Yes, right.
Because he's doing work for her, he's doing a job for her, and yet he's not quite sure what her motives are, really.
Yeah. Right. We aren't as the reader either.
No, we're not.
Yeah.
I mean, we sort of see she's a rebel, she's hiring him to do this job. We get to know her more and more as the story goes along, and get to know her better, but the more we get to know her, the more uncertain it is what she's really after.
Yes, right. So at the party, Conrad, Suki's dad, gives a little speech. It's his birthday party. He's turning 80, so clearly an older dad.
Right.
And he praises the family's loyalty to each other.
Yeah.
Is he actually praising, or is he warning?
I suspect he's actually warning. He's warning. He is a tough guy, and his innovation was figuring out how to market to doctors, how to market this drug to doctors.
Yeah. And he is a physician himself.
He was a physician himself, exactly. And he's realized that the way to get doctors on board in prescribing this thing is to convince them that they are really fulfilling their Hippocratic oath by alleviating pain.
Yes, right.
And withholding from them how dangerously addictive this drug is.
Yes, because they can only go on based on the information they
what
have.
they have.
Right.
Right, exactly. So he sort of figured out, and then he flies doctors into to resorts and pays them off for so-called speaking fees, that sort of thing. Yeah, he is he's a master marketer, and that's really the secret behind these opioid drugs, is they were marketed in a really clever way.
Yes, right, right.
In a dangerous way.
Yeah.
And we're seeing the results of it now.
Yes, because unfortunately this fiction is actually partly fact, in terms of, the effect that these drugs have had on everyday people,
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I know that some areas have just been devastated by the opioid crisis, so yeah. And I like the way the book sort of, takes us right into the center of that, so we can see. I mean, we start with it in the small scene, with knowing Shawn just died, his good buddy, died of an overdose, and then we start, sort of backing up and seeing the more global effects of this. And
and we see different angles, as you point out. We see Nick's friend who's terribly wounded, and his need for opioids. We talk to scientists in these companies who think what they're doing is virtuous.
Yeah. Right.
Some do, some don't.
Well, at least they try to talk themselves into
or
that.
At least exactly have persuaded themselves of that. But I wanted to sort of give different points of view about the drug.
Yeah, which comes through very nicely. Well, I want to thank you for being on the show, and unfortunately we are out of time. You have been watching Behind the Pages from the staff of 22 City View. I'm Diane Goshgarian. And thanks so much for being here.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah. The cameras are still rolling, so we'll just, stay.